Very nice to see a few familiar faces on this call as well. So, yeah, really good to see you. So I'm going to kick off this afternoon's webinar with a little bit of a back to basics, I guess, in terms of the economics of the workforce. That was the brief that Nick gave me, and I guess it's the kind of framework within which Rob is then going to present the meat and potatoes. So I'm kind of the plate, I think. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is the value of the workforce, what drives workforce value, what perspectives we might want to think about when we're thinking about workforce value, and then really importantly, when we're thinking about strategic workforce planning, what's the relationship between what we're planning to do for the workforce and what we need to do for the wider health and care system. And I'm going to be talking, I know there are some people on this call who are not in the health sector. My presentation is very much focused on health, but you'll see some parallels, I'm sure, in other markets. So let me just kick off. First thing I wanted to say is health workforce has a real contribution to make to the economy. It is not just a cost to the system. It's not just something that we spend money on in order to deliver services and therefore something that somehow we've got to squeeze in terms of cost. It is also something that contributes to economic value. It's taken quite a long time for this to be very well articulated, but I think once the WHO undertook its high-level commission on health, employment and economic growth globally and looked at all the evidence and produced this sort of enormous pack of resources and report investing in the health workforce, it really brought it home just how important this is as a contributor to economic value. So investing in health systems and investing in the health workforce promotes economic growth in a number of ways. It stimulates economic output because employees go out and buy things and spend money, don't they? It stimulates social protection and cohesion. So people who are living in a health secure environment, more likely to be able to go to work and contribute to economic stability and economic growth. Huge contributor to innovation, and a huge amount of innovation comes from the health workforce, and that stimulates science and innovation right across the economy. And then as we have it recently experienced with COVID-19, it contributes through providing health security. So if your population is health secure, it functions as part of the economy. If your population is not health secure, then we get things like lockdowns and people not able to participate in day-to-day living. So really, really important to think about that value. In terms of the health workforce as well, it tends to not go up and down in terms of economic booms and busts. So you don't end up having that sort of big wave of economic downturns and upturns. It tends to smooth that. It doesn't. The evidence suggests it doesn't contribute to wage inflation particularly. People become health professionals for a number of different reasons, so it doesn't necessarily stimulate everybody wanting higher salaries. And it really does help those other sectors to be more productive. So lots of really good reasons for investing in the health workforce and thinking of it as an asset, as a good, as something that we should be nurturing. Just thinking about the health system itself, a lot of you on the call are from the NHS in England, and as you know, we are adopting along this guidance from the World Health Organization, as most countries are looking at adopting integrated care. The NHS in England is out front with the development of integrated care systems, and workforce has a huge role to play in making that work. And these two curves on this chart is designed to sort of illustrate what the value of an integrated care system might be in relation to what we call the quadruple aim. So, in terms of improvements in health outcomes, improvements in the experience of receiving care, the health system efficiency. Now with ICS goals being to contribute to the wider economy. So that value curve without the workforce investment is the expectation is that over time these integrated care systems will really start to make a difference. Well, if you accompany that with workforce investment, you're going to be pushing that curve up. You're going to be pushing it up because you're going to be getting there faster. That's the acceleration value, and you're going to be pushing it up because you're going to be getting better value from a huge part of the resource that's going into delivering integrated care. So the idea is that if we really get this workforce investment right, we can really generate much more value from the integrated care systems than otherwise would be the case. So let's just go back to basics a little bit. I want you to start thinking about the workforce, if you like, as a good, as something that you buy as a biscuit. There you go, and you might get the biscuits in. So generally speaking, from an economics perspective, for any given, role or level of quality, let's say, or any given biscuit, a ginger nut, for example, my favorite, the supply of that good tends to increase as the price increases. So people, if the price of ginger nuts go up, lots more people will come in and start to supply them because they think, oh, that's pretty profitable. And this curve on this chart here shows that. So as the quantities, you move to the right-hand side, when the quantity goes up, you're also moving upwards in the chart as the price goes up. So that's a very basic supply curve. Let's think about demand. So the demand for those ginger nuts. And it is true to say that for any given role or level of quality, and of course all other things being equal, the demand for that economic good falls as price increases, right? So I know that if if the price goes down for the ginger nuts, I'm going to want to buy more. If the price goes up, I'm going to want to buy less. Now, the sweet spot from a market perspective, from an economics perspective, is that in a well-performing market, the price, where that intersects between demand and supply, is the economic value. So it's the price that the market, if you like, is prepared to pay for that good, for the value that the good brings to those who want to use it, and the value that generates for those who are prepared to supply it. So here we have the market price being P1, and it delivers a certain level of quantity of supply, Q1. Now, what happens when you set that price lower than the market price is that you get a gap. And you get a gap between the amount that's supplied and the amount that's in demand. And in the NHS, that's quite a big issue because we set our pay bands nationally. And there's lots and lots of evidence from the market, never mind from what people are saying, that there is a gap between supply and demand for staff. And that gap is kind of plugged by agency staff. Lots of NHS organisations have to go out and hire in contractors or locums, as we call them. It's also showing through in staff workforce well-being. If you look at the staff surveys in the NHS, you can see a lot of burnout, a lot of people who are very feeling that they're sort of being made to work beyond their scope of practice or beyond their normal hours. And the worst case, you get service shortfalls. So this in health speak, what this tends to materialize as is things like admission thresholds going up, service thresholds going up, so people's entitlement to services going up because there just aren't enough staff to deliver. We can see it really loud and clear with the waiting lists and the waiting times at the moment for planned surgery and planned care. And all of that sort of pushes into cost pressures. So what can we do about it? So if we look at this from a labour market perspective, one of the things that we can try and do is push that supply up, and we can push it up for any given level of wage or any given price by taking various actions. And I'm sure, Patrick will recall from his time at Health Education England, this is a lot of the things that Health and Education England were doing, trying to promote entry into the labour market through providing career opportunities, improving working conditions, lowering the cost of training. This is a big issue, is trying to put subsidies in to help people train, increase retention of trainees, making the life of trainees a little smoother and a little better, increasing training productivity, so you don't necessarily have to take so long to get to where you need to get, increasing career life, encouraging people to return to practice, to come back into the workforce. We saw a lot of that in COVID. And then increasing career path flexibility so people can actually move around a bit more, so it's a bit more of a choice. So that will all do things, that will push this supply curve to the right and increase the quantity supplied. But it's not the only thing that you have to do. So the other thing is to actually try and reduce demand. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you're saying that you want less workforce as such. It may be that we're talking here about improving things like productivity. So for any given price, we want to see if we can get more value. Now that might come not by making people work harder, because that's all that's going to do is deliver more stress, but things like digital enablement, things like using digital tools to really encourage and complement and make it easier for people to do their jobs. Changing the skill mix, that's another way of changing the demand for staff. So the use of advanced practice, for example, reduces necessarily the demand for potentially for some types of medical staff, because a lot of advanced practitioners take on some of those roles. So the other big thing that you can do is redesign care pathways so that they are more efficient and so that there's less duplication and less waste across the system. So that gives you a little bit of a perspective, the kind of actions that you can take in terms of demand and supply to really try and get to grips with this disconnect between the national pay bands and the current state of the market. It's not just about price. Really, really important is the opportunity for increasing value by improving workforce well-being. Lots of evidence now that shows if you actually invest in people, then their willingness to work for a particular rate of pay and in particular for a particular number of hours is really much more influenced by how they feel at work, whether they feel valued, whether they feel engaged. And so improving workforce well-being can really help the individual in terms of getting longer working life and return on their own investment, on their education and training, can see their career progression move through some of those glass ceilings. And then for the health and care system, this reduces the costs too, because it reduces the amount of time that people are at work but not really working, and we call that in economics presenteeism. It can also reduce absenteeism, so sickness rates come down, and it also reduces the speed at which people move jobs. And all of those things cost the health and care system, and hence the taxpayer, a significant resource. So just to summarize, if you want to think about some of these things in terms of the workforce plan, is thinking about how can we do things like accelerate time to train? How can we do things like extend NHS careers, longer working lives, those kinds of things? All of these are sort of workforce transformation issues. And then also, how can we improve the NHS productivity and better match the supply and demand for NHS workforce to really shift that integrated care system curve, so we're accelerating and improving value from investing in integrated care. That all sounds great, doesn't it? But we all know that health system is funded in this country from taxpayers' funds, and integrated care boards get spending budgets, and they have to get best value out of those spending budgets. So we know that health system funding pressures are likely to increase over time. And if you look at this slide, we're looking at an upward curve which I've called business as usual, which is, if nothing else happened, the pressure on those funds would go up and up over time. And the key kind of drivers for that are things like the fact that the population is growing, the fact that it is slightly older population, and when we get older, we tend to disproportionately use more services. The incidence and prevalence of diseases drives growth. And the availability of new diagnostics and treatments and innovative drugs all are a good thing, but they also drive growth in sort of funding for health spending. And integrated care systems around the country at the moment are calculating what they think that business as usual curve looks like, and then they're comparing it with what they think they're actually going to get. So the blue curve here is the sort of likely available funding. As you can see, I've deliberately drawn it as not increasing at quite the same rate as the pressures are increasing. There's plenty of evidence of that. But that gives you a funding gap. And, ICBs that I've been working with are all facing, 5-10 year funding gaps that are quite substantial. So left unchecked, this is going to become a really serious problem. So a lot of the ICBs around the country are trying to close that gap by developing these strategic plans to achieve affordability. And they're looking at strategic initiatives such as improving prevention, proactive care, lots going on in proactive care, care coordination, and those sorts of things to try and help target on those most in need to control demand for the health services, and all other things being equal, take some of that demand pressure off. There's also a lot of service redesign going on to improve the way that the system delivers, get better outcomes for the same money, or even reducing waste and duplication. And then there's also strategic initiatives to improve specifically workforce value. And that's about system level initiatives to improve the balance of demand and supply, and system initiatives to improve workforce well-being. And I keep mentioning reduction of duplication and waste. This is always and everywhere a really big issue.